The torpedo hit at 13 minutes past 1 in the afternoon. Able seaman Jack Davies was carrying a box of ammunition across the hangar deck when the world turned sideways. He did not hear the explosion. He felt it. 4 torpedoes fired from 400 yards away. They punched through the hull of HMS Eagle like fingers through wet paper. The carrier lurched. Davies stumbled. The ammunition box flew from his hands and slid across the deck. Water was already pouring in. Not dripping. Pouring. A wall of seawater 6 feet high crashing through bulkheads. Davies looked up and saw daylight where there should have been steel. A hole the size of a bus. He ran. The Eagle was already listing. 10 degrees. Then 15. The ship was rolling onto its side like a dying whale. Davies reached the ladder to the flight deck. Men were screaming, not orders, just screaming. He climbed. His hands slipped on the rungs. Someone fell past him. He did not look. He kept climbing. Above him, sunlight. Below him, black water rising. On the bridge, Captain Lachlan McIntosh grabbed the intercom. He tried to give the order to abandon ship. The intercom was dead. The electrical system was already flooded. He shouted instead, "Abandon ship." His voice was lost in the noise of tearing metal and rushing water. The Eagle was capsizing. 4 minutes since the torpedoes hit. The carrier was rolling past 30 degrees. Men were sliding across the deck. Some were jumping into the sea. Some were clinging to railings. Some were still inside. They would never get out. Davies reached the flight deck. The sky was tilted. The horizon was vertical. Aircraft were sliding off the deck into the ocean. Spitfires and Hurricanes tumbling like toys. He saw a man crushed under a fighter plane. The man was still moving. Davies looked away. He ran toward the edge of the deck. Other men were already jumping. He did not hesitate. He jumped. The water was warm. Mediterranean warm. August warm. Davies went under. He kicked. He surfaced. Behind him, the Eagle was dying. The carrier was lying on its side now. 45 degrees. 50. Men were crawling along the hull trying to reach the keel, trying to stand on the side of the ship as it rolled. It did not work. The Eagle kept rolling, kept sinking. 4 minutes and 30 seconds since the torpedoes hit. Davies swam. He did not look back. Around him, other men were swimming. Some were screaming. Some were silent. The sea was full of oil, thick black oil leaking from the ruptured fuel tanks. It covered everything. Davies swallowed some. It tasted like poison. He kept swimming. A destroyer was coming. HMS Lookout. It was steaming toward them. Men were throwing ropes over the side. Davies grabbed one. Hands pulled him up. He collapsed on the deck. He was shaking, not from cold, from shock. Behind him, the Eagle rolled completely over. The keel was pointing at the sky. The propellers were still turning, still spinning in the air. Then the carrier slipped under. It took 7 minutes from the first torpedo to total disappearance. 7 minutes for an aircraft carrier to die. 131 men went down with the ship. 929 were pulled from the water. Davies was one of them. He sat on the deck of the Lookout and stared at the empty sea where the Eagle had been. There was nothing left, just oil and debris and floating bodies. 300 yards away, on the bridge of the SS Ohio, Captain Dudley Mason watched the Eagle sink. He did not move. He did not speak. His first officer asked if they should turn back. Mason shook his head. The convoy was not turning back. The convoy was continuing east, toward Malta, toward the killing ground, toward 700 miles of submarines and bombers and minefields. The Eagle had been one of 4 aircraft carriers. Now there were 3. The Eagle had been carrying 16 fighters. Now those fighters were on the bottom of the Mediterranean. Mason looked at the other ships in the convoy. 58 ships remaining. He wondered how many would still be alive tomorrow. The Ohio was an American tanker, built in Texas, 450 feet long, 9,000 tons displacement. She was the largest and fastest oil tanker in the world when she was launched 2 years ago. Now she was a bomb. 11,000 tons of kerosene and diesel fuel, enough explosive power to vaporize every ship within a mile. One direct hit and the Ohio would not sink. She would explode. Mason knew this. His crew knew this. They had volunteered anyway. Mason was 40 years old. He had been at sea for 22 years. He had survived 2 sinkings already, once in the Atlantic, once in the Indian Ocean. Both times he got into a lifeboat and waited for rescue. Both times rescue came. He did not think rescue would come this time. The Mediterranean was different. The Mediterranean was where convoys died. In March, a convoy of 4 ships tried to reach Malta. 1 made it. In June, a convoy of 6 ships tried. 2 made it. This convoy was 14 merchant ships. Mason did not think 14 would make it. He thought maybe 5 would make it. Maybe 3. Maybe none. He looked at his crew. 67 men. British, American, Canadian. Most of them were young, early 20s. Too young to have families, too young to have regrets. Mason had both. He had a wife named Elsie. He had not spoken to her in 3 years. Something had broken between them. He did not know what. She stopped visiting, stopped writing. He still wore his wedding ring. He did not know why. He thought about taking it off. He never did. The Ohio had no armor, no torpedo bulkheads, no reinforced hull. She was a merchant ship pressed into military service because Britain was desperate. Malta was starving. Malta was running out of fuel. Malta was running out of ammunition. Without Malta, the Mediterranean belonged to Germany. Without the Mediterranean, Rommel would take Egypt. Without Egypt, Britain would lose the war. That was the calculation. That was why Mason was here. That was why the Ohio was sailing into the most dangerous stretch of water on Earth, carrying enough fuel to keep Malta alive for 2 months. The convoy was steaming east at 16 knots. Behind them, the sun was setting. Ahead of them, Sicily. The island was 100 miles away. On Sicily were 300 German bombers. Junkers, 88s, Heinkel 111s, Stuka dive bombers. They had been bombing Malta for 2 years. 3,000 air raids, 6,700 tons of explosives. More bombs per square mile than London, more than Coventry, more than anywhere. Malta should have surrendered a year ago. Malta had not surrendered. Malta was still fighting, but Malta was dying. The island had 17 days of food left, 11 days of fuel, 14 days of ammunition. After that, nothing. After that, surrender. Mason looked at the horizon. The sky was orange. The sea was black. It was beautiful. He thought about his wife. He thought about London. He thought about the house they had bought before the war. The house they never lived in. The house she was living in now without him. He thought about writing her a letter. He had tried before. He never knew what to say. He wanted to say he was sorry. He did not know what he was sorry for. He wanted to say he missed her. He did not know if that was true. He wanted to say he loved her. He did not know if he still did. The first officer interrupted his thoughts. "Sir, message from the Commodore." Mason turned. "What does it say?" The first officer handed him the telegram. It was short. "Eagle lost. Maintain formation. Expect attacks at dawn." Mason folded the telegram and put it in his pocket. He looked at the crew on deck. They were watching him, waiting for orders, waiting for reassurance. Mason had no reassurance to give. He said, "Check the fire hoses. Check the pumps. Check the guns. If something happens tonight, I want us ready." The crew moved. They did not ask questions. They knew better. Mason returned to watching the sea. Somewhere out there were submarines. German submarines. Italian submarines. They were already moving into position, already lining up their shots. The Eagle had been the first kill. There would be more. Mason looked at the other tankers in the convoy. 3 of them. The Ohio was the largest. The Ohio was the primary target. The Germans knew what the Ohio was carrying. They knew how valuable that cargo was. They would throw everything at the Ohio. Torpedoes, bombs, dive bombers, fighters, everything. Mason checked his watch. It was 1900 hours, 7 in the evening. They would reach the Narrows between Sicily and Tunisia tomorrow afternoon. That was when the real attacks would begin. That was when the Luftwaffe would send everything they had. Mason estimated 80 to 100 aircraft, attacking in waves, attacking continuously. He did not think the convoy's fighters could stop them. The convoy had 3 carriers left, maybe 40 fighters total. The Germans had 300 bombers. The mathematics were bad. He thought about turning back. The thought lasted 3 seconds. Turning back meant Malta fell. Malta falling meant Egypt fell. Egypt falling meant the war was lost. There was no turning back. There was only forward. Forward into the bombers. Forward into the submarines. Forward into whatever was waiting in the Narrows. Mason looked at the Ohio. The tanker was riding low in the water. 11,000 tons of fuel. She was slow. She was heavy. She was a target. He thought about the crew. He thought about the 67 men who would die if the Ohio was hit. He thought about the 270,000 people on Malta who would die if the Ohio did not make it. The decision was already made. It had been made in London 2 weeks ago when Churchill authorized the convoy. It had been made when Mason agreed to captain the Ohio. It had been made when his crew volunteered to sail into the Mediterranean, knowing they would probably die. The decision was made. Now it was just a matter of surviving long enough to reach Malta. Mason did not think they would. But he would try. He would try because there was no alternative. He would try because 67 men were depending on him. He would try because 270,000 people were depending on him. He would try because if he did not, the war was lost. The sun disappeared below the horizon. The sky turned black. The stars came out. Mason stayed on the bridge. He did not sleep. He did not eat. He stood and watched the sea. Somewhere out there in the darkness, submarines were waiting. Somewhere ahead, bombers were preparing. Somewhere on Malta, people were starving. Mason thought about all of them. Then he stopped thinking. Thinking did not help. Thinking made it worse. He focused on the ship, on the engines, on the course, on staying alive until dawn. That was all that mattered now. Staying alive until dawn. The bombers came at dawn. Mason saw them first, black dots on the horizon. He counted 12, then 20. Then he stopped counting because his hands started shaking. He gripped the railing. The shaking got worse. He looked at his hands. They would not stop. He had not slept in 36 hours. He had watched the Eagle sink yesterday. He had watched 131 men drown. Some of them were still floating in the convoy's wake. Mason closed his eyes. He could still see them crawling on the hull, crawling toward the keel, sliding, falling, gone. All hands to battle stations. This is not a drill. Mason's voice over the intercom was steady. His hands were not steady. His first officer looked at him. "Are you all right, sir?" Mason lied. "Yes, I am fine." He was not fine. His heart was hammering. His mouth was dry. He thought about running, just running down to his cabin and locking the door and staying there until it was over. He did not run. He stayed on the bridge because that was what captains did. They stayed, even when they wanted to run. The crew moved to their positions. Gunner Thomas Williams climbed into the Beaufort's gun mount. 19 years old, from Liverpool. His father had told him the merchant marine was safer than the army. His father had been wrong about many things. Williams loaded the ammunition belt. His hands were not shaking. He was too young to understand, too young to know that in 8 minutes he would see things that would never leave his mind, that 40 years from now he would still wake up screaming. 5 miles away, Lieutenant Commander Richard Cork climbed into his Sea Hurricane. He strapped in, started the engine, thought about his wife, thought about London, thought about the letter he had written last night, the letter that said he was sorry for leaving, sorry for choosing the Navy, sorry for being a coward who could not face her after she lost the baby, their baby. She had written him about it 3 months ago. He had not replied. What could he say? He had thrown away last night's letter too. What was the point? She had stopped writing to him. She had given up. Cork pushed the throttle forward. The Hurricane lifted off. Behind him, 11 more fighters followed. Cork did not think they would be enough. The radar said 40 bombers, 40 against 12. He was going to die today. He knew it. Everyone knew it. Nobody said it. The German formation was led by Major Walter Innekerus, Junkers 88 bomber, 62 combat missions, 4 ships sunk. He wanted 5. Below him the convoy was turning, ships spreading out. making smoke. It would not help. And Icarus had bombs. Bombs always found their target eventually. He signaled his formation. Attack the tankers first. The tankers were everything. Without fuel, Malta dies. Without Malta, we win. And Icarus armed his bombs. He thought about Berlin. He thought about his apartment on Friedrichstrasse. He thought about his wife who was probably sleeping with someone else while he was out here trying not to die. He rolled into the dive. Cork saw the first bomber diving. He was below it. Bad position. The German had altitude, had energy, had everything. Cork pulled back on the stick. His hurricane climbed. The engine screamed. He was burning fuel too fast. 25 minutes before he had to land. He armed his guns. 2,400 bullets. Enough to kill hundreds of men. Cork did not think about that anymore. If he thought about it, he would have to feel it. He thought about the bomb sight, the lead, the deflection. He fired. The tracers hit the bomber's cockpit. Glass exploded. The pilot jerked. His hands left the controls. Blood sprayed across the instrument panel. The bomber kept diving. Nobody was flying it. It hit the sea at 300 miles per hour. The impact tore the aircraft apart. Cork watched it disintegrate. He felt nothing. He used to feel something. Guilt, horror, satisfaction. Now he felt nothing. Just emptiness. He turned toward the next bomber, fired again. Another pilot dead. Another aircraft falling. Cork's hands were steady. His heart was steady. Everything inside him was dead already. The bombers were just catching up. On the Ohio, Mason watched the dogfight. Everything turning, everything burning. A German bomber broke through. It was diving toward the Ohio. Mason grabbed the intercom. Brace for impact. Williams opened fire. The Bofors hammered. Shells climbing. The bomber kept coming. It released at 3,000 feet. Mason watched the bomb fall, tumbling, spinning. It looked slow. It was not slow. He could not turn fast enough, could not do anything. He thought about Elsie, thought about their wedding day. She had worn white. She had smiled. She had been happy. When had that changed? When had she stopped smiling? The bomb hit the water 10 feet from the stern. The explosion lifted the Ohio. The entire stern rose out of the water. Mason was thrown against the bulkhead. His head hit steel. Blood ran down his face. He tasted copper. He grabbed the railing. The Ohio crashed back, metal screaming, rivets popping. The stern cracked but held. No fire, no rupture. They were alive. Mason touched his face. His hand came away red. He looked at the blood. He thought, this is what dying looks like. This is what the Eagle looked like. Men bleeding, men drowning, men gone. The second wave came at 10:30. 40 Italian bombers, carrying torpedoes. Mason saw them low across the water. Torpedoes were death. You could not see them coming, could not turn fast enough, could not pray hard enough. The destroyers charged forward, making a screen, throwing up fire. It was not enough. One bomber broke through. Capitano Luca Bernardi, 23, Rome, wife, daughter, Sophia, 2 months old. He had never seen her, just photographs. He touched his pocket now. The photograph was there, over his heart. He looked at it. Her face, round, perfect, sleeping. He would never see that face. He knew it. His fuel gauge was showing red. His engines were damaged. He was not going home. He armed the torpedo. His hands were shaking, not from fear, from knowing, from understanding that in 5 minutes he would be dead, and his daughter would grow up without a father, and his wife would remarry, and Sophia would call another man Papa. Bernardi looked at the Ohio. If he sank it, Malta would starve. The war would end. Sophia would grow up in a world where Italy had won. That had to mean something. That had to be worth dying for. 300 yards, 200. Anti-aircraft fire everywhere. Shrapnel punching through his wing, the bomber shuddering. 100 yards. Bernardi pulled the release. The torpedo dropped, hit the water, armed, ran. Bernardi looked at the photograph one last time. He whispered, "Forgive me, Sophia. I tried." The anti-aircraft fire found his engine. It exploded. The bomber rolled. Bernardi did not eject. There was no point. He was 70 miles from land. He would drown anyway. Better to die fast. The bomber hit the water. Bernardi's last thought was of his daughter's face. Mason saw the splash. Torpedo starboard side. He spun the wheel. The Ohio turned. Slowly. Too slowly. 14,000 tons does not turn quickly. The torpedo was closing. White wake. Straight line. Death approaching. Mason thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Not with his wife. Not with his family. Alone on a ship full of fuel about to explode. The torpedo was 30 yards away. 20. 10. HMS Ledbury turned into the torpedo's path. Lieutenant Commander Roger Hill had made his decision. The Ledbury was expendable. The Ohio was not. Hill accelerated to 30 knots, trying to intercept. The torpedo missed his destroyer by 15 feet, kept running. Mason watched it come. He thought about Elsie, about the things he never said, about the apologies he never made, about the life they never lived. The torpedo was 8 feet from the hull when the Ohio's turn finally worked. 8 feet, the width of a man lying down. The torpedo ran past the bow, disappeared, sank. Mason's legs gave out. He sat down on the deck, right there on the bridge. He could not stand anymore. His whole body was shaking. His first officer knelt beside him. "Sir, we need to move." Mason nodded. He could not move. His body would not obey. He stayed sitting. The first officer helped him up. Mason stood. He looked at his hands, still shaking. Would they ever stop? He did not think so. The third wave came at noon. Stukas, the sirens screaming, the sound of death approaching. 12 of them, maybe 15, diving vertically. Williams was still at the Bofors. 3 hours of firing. His shoulders ached. His ears rang. He could not hear anything except sirens. A Stuka dove at him. Straight down. He tracked it. Fired. The Stuka released at 1,000 feet. The bomb fell toward Williams. He kept firing. The Stuka pulled out. Williams's tracers followed. Hit. The Stuka's engine exploded. Williams did not watch it fall. He was watching the bomb. It hit the Ohio amidships. Port side. Punched through the deck. Disappeared inside. 1 second of silence. Then white light. Orange fire. Black smoke. The explosion tore through the pump room. 3 men were inside. Jones, Miller, Clark. The explosion killed them instantly. No screaming, no suffering. They simply stopped existing. The lucky ones always died fast. Mason ran. The pump room door was jammed. He kicked it. Again, again. It opened. Smoke poured out, thick, black, choking. Mason stepped inside. He could not see, could not breathe. He called out, "Jones, Miller, Clark." No answer. He moved forward. His foot hit something soft. He looked down. It was Jones. Half of Jones. The other half was somewhere else. Maybe blown through the bulkhead. Maybe vaporized. Mason's stomach turned. He vomited. He could not help it. He had seen death before, but not like this. Not this close. Not this real. He wiped his mouth. Stepped over what was left of Jones. Kept moving. He found Miller against the bulkhead. Chest crushed. Eyes open. Staring at nothing. Mason closed the eyes. He looked for Clark. He found Clark's jacket. Clark's boot. Clark's watch still ticking on a severed arm. He did not find Clark. Clark was gone. Turned into pieces too small to identify. Mason stepped back into the corridor. He sealed the bulkhead. Locked it. He leaned against the wall. His legs gave out again. He slid down. Sat on the deck. Put his head in his hands. He could not breathe. Could not think. Could only see Jones's body. Miller's eyes. Clark's arm. He sat there until his first officer found him. "Sir, we need you on the bridge." Mason looked up. His face was covered in blood and soot and vomit. He looked like a corpse. He stood. He walked to the bridge. The crew stared at him. He picked up the intercom. "This is the captain. The pump room is destroyed. Jones, Miller, and Clark are dead. The fires are contained. We are still operational. We are still moving toward Malta." His voice did not shake. His hands shook. He put down the intercom. He looked at the sea. 5 ships sinking. 9 merchant ships left. The Ohio was the only tanker. She was damaged, cracked, bleeding. But she was still floating, still moving, still carrying 11,000 tons of fuel that would keep Malta alive. Mason checked his watch. 1,400 hours, 8 hours of attacks, 90 miles traveled, 400 miles to go. He looked at his crew, exhausted, terrified, still at their posts. He thought about Jones and Miller and Clark. He thought about the Eagle. He thought about Bernardi falling into the sea. He thought about all the men dying today because old men in offices had decided this war needed to be fought. The sun was setting, blood-red sky. Mason stood on the bridge. He did not leave. If he left, he would have to think. If he thought, he would have to feel. If he felt, he would break. So he stood. He watched the sea. Somewhere submarines were waiting. Somewhere torpedo boats were moving. Somewhere on Malta people were starving. Mason thought about all of them. Then he stopped thinking. He looked at Williams still at his gun, at his crew still at their posts, at the Ohio still moving forward. He picked up the intercom one more time. Well done. All of you. We are still alive. That means we are winning. The crew did not cheer. They just nodded. They knew the truth. They were not winning. They were just not dead yet. There was a difference. The submarines came at midnight. Mason heard the explosion before he saw it, a deep thump that traveled through water and steel. He turned. Behind them, the Empire Hope was burning. She had been carrying ammunition. The torpedo hit her magazine. The explosion turned night into day, a white flash that lit up the entire convoy. Then the ship was gone. Just gone. 30 seconds from torpedo to disappearance. 47 men on that ship. None of them had time to scream. Mason watched the empty water where the Empire Hope had been. 47 men. 47 families. 47 women who would get telegrams saying, "We regret to inform you." He thought about Elsie. Would she cry if she got that telegram? Would she care? He did not know anymore. He picked up the intercom. All crew remain at battle stations. Submarines in the area. Do not show lights. Do not smoke on deck. Stay alert. His voice was calm. Inside, he was screaming. Williams was still at his gun. 16 hours. His back was cramping. His hands were numb. He could not feel his fingers anymore. He did not leave. Where would he go? Below deck, where he could not see the torpedoes coming, where he would die trapped in steel filling with water. No. Better to stay here. Better to see death coming. Williams watched the men burning in the water where the Empire Hope had been. He thought about his father, about Liverpool, about the lie that brought him here. The merchant marine is safe, son, safer than the army. His father had lied about many things. This was just one more. Williams thought about the gun, about pointing it at himself instead of the sky. It would be faster than drowning, cleaner than burning. He did not do it. He did not know why. Maybe because everyone else was still here. Maybe because dying alone was worse than dying together. 3 miles away, Captain Lieutenant Helmut Rosenbaum stood at the periscope of U-73. He had just sunk his second ship, the Empire Hope. He was looking for his third. He scanned the convoy, counted ships, identified targets. He saw the tanker, the big one, the American, the Ohio. Berlin had sent specific orders. Sink the Ohio. Everything else was secondary. Rosenbaum calculated range. 2,000 meters. Too far. He needed closer. Ahead, slow. Close to 1,000 meters. Prepare tubes 1 and 2. The U-boat crept forward. Silent. Invisible. Rosenbaum looked through the periscope. The Ohio was getting bigger. 1,500 meters. 1,000 meters. Perfect. He gave the order. Fire 1, fire 2. Mason saw the splash. 2 splashes. Port side. 400 yards out. Torpedoes in the water. He did not think. He reacted. Hard to starboard. The Ohio turned. Too slowly. Always too slowly. The torpedoes were running at 40 knots. The Ohio was making 16. The mathematics were bad. Mason grabbed the railing. This is it. This is how it ends. Not in daylight. In darkness. Drowning in the dark. The first torpedo missed by 20 feet. Ran past the bow. Kept going. Hit nothing. The second torpedo was tracking better. heading straight for midships, straight for the fuel tanks. Mason watched it come. He could see the wake, phosphorescent trail in black water, beautiful and terrible. He thought about Jones and Miller and Clark, about joining them, about finally stopping, about finally resting. The torpedo was 30 yards away, 20, 10. HMS Bramham turned into the torpedo's path. The destroyer's captain had seen the wake, had made his choice. The Bramham was 300 tons. The Ohio was 14,000 tons. Simple mathematics. The destroyer accelerated, put herself between the torpedo and the tanker. The torpedo hit the Bramham amidships. The explosion tore the destroyer in half. The bow kept moving forward. The stern started sinking. Men were thrown into the water. Some were on fire. Some were already dead. Some were trapped inside. The Bramham's captain was on the bridge when it went down. He did not try to escape. He went down with his ship, his choice, his sacrifice. His death bought the Ohio 30 more seconds of life. Mason watched the Bramham die. He did not know the captain's name, would never know it. The man had died to save him, had died to save 67 men on the Ohio, had died to save Malta. Mason thought about that sacrifice, about what it meant, about whether it was worth it. He would never know. He picked up the intercom. The Bramham is lost. All hands keep watching. There are more submarines. The submarine attack stopped. Suddenly. Completely. Mason waited. 1 minute. 5 minutes. Nothing. He thought maybe they had run out of torpedoes. Maybe they had given up. Then the radar operator shouted, 50 aircraft inbound. Bearing 090. Distance 80 miles. The submarines had not given up. They had been calling for reinforcements. At 0200 hours, another explosion. Another ship gone. The Clan Ferguson. Torpedoed. Sinking. 53 men in the water. The destroyers were picking up survivors, but there were too many ships sinking and not enough destroyers. Some men would not be picked up. Some men would drown waiting. Some men would drown knowing rescue was not coming. Mason watched through binoculars. He could see them in the water, waving, shouting. He could not hear them, could only see them. Tiny figures in black sea growing smaller and smaller as the convoy moved away. The convoy did not stop, could not stop. Stopping meant dying. At 0400, the Ohio's engines started making a strange sound, grinding noise deep in the machinery. The chief engineer came to the bridge. "Sir, we have a problem. The starboard engine is overheating. We need to slow down or it will seize." Mason looked at him. "How long can we run at full speed?" "Maybe 2 hours. Maybe less." Mason calculated. 300 miles to Malta. At 16 knots, 19 hours. At 12 knots, 25 hours. 6 extra hours in the killing zone. Keep running at full speed. If the engine seizes, we will run on 1. The engineer nodded. He knew there was no choice. There was never a choice. Only forward. The sun came up at 0530. Mason had been awake for 48 hours. His eyes burned. His head ached. He could not remember eating. He did not care. Food did not matter. Sleep did not matter. Only Malta mattered. He looked at the crew. They looked like ghosts. Hollow eyes, gray faces, moving like sleepwalkers. Williams was asleep at his gun, head resting on the breech. Mason did not wake him. Let the boy sleep. He had earned it. At 0600, the radar operator shouted, "Aircraft inbound. Bearing 085. Altitude 15,000. Distance 60 miles. Time to contact 20 minutes. All hands to battle stations. Air attack imminent." Williams jerked awake. He looked confused, disoriented. Then he remembered. He grabbed the gun controls. His hands were shaking. They had not stopped shaking since yesterday. The bombers came low, skimming the water, trying to avoid radar. 20, maybe 25. Cork was already in the air. He had taken off 10 minutes ago. He saw the bombers, counted them. He had 4 fighters with him, 4 against 25. He armed his guns, turned toward the bombers, thought about his wife, about the baby they lost, about how he never said goodbye. He fired. The bombers scattered. Some turned left, some right, some kept coming. Cork chased one, fired, missed. The bomber was jinking, turning, making itself hard. Cork followed, fired again, hit. The bomber's wing came off. The aircraft rolled, fell, crashed. Cork did not watch. He was turning toward the next bomber. His fuel gauge showed red. 10 minutes left. 10 minutes to kill as many as he could. He fired. Another bomber fell. His guns clicked empty. No ammunition. Cork pulled the trigger again. Nothing. He looked at his hands. They were steady. He thought about his wife, about the baby, about how he had run away instead of staying. He was still running, still trying to escape. The fuel gauge showed empty. He would not make it back to the carrier. Good, he whispered. I am sorry. Then he turned toward the bombers. One more. He would ram one more before he went down. His Hurricane accelerated. He picked his target. A Junkers diving toward the convoy. Cork aimed for the cockpit. The German pilot saw him coming. Tried to turn. Too late. Cork's Hurricane hit the bomber at 300 miles per hour. Both aircraft exploded. Pieces of metal and pieces of men rained into the Mediterranean. Cork's last thought was of his wife's face. Then nothing. The first bomb hit the water 50 feet from the Ohio. Close. Too close. The explosion sent a column of water into the air. The water came down like rain. Mason was soaked, freezing. He did not move. He watched the next bomber diving. This one was coming straight at them. Williams opened fire. The Bofors hammered. Shells climbing. Tracers arcing. The bomber kept coming. Released at 2,000 feet. The bomb fell. Mason watched it. He had watched so many bombs fall. This one looked different. This one looked like it would hit. He was right. The bomb struck the Ohio on the starboard side, just aft of the bridge, punched through the deck, kept going, exploded in the engine room. The blast killed 4 men instantly: Roberts, Thompson, Andrews, McCarthy. They were standing next to the starboard engine. One moment they were there, the next moment they were not. The engine room filled with smoke and steam and screaming metal. The starboard engine seized, stopped. The Ohio lurched, slowed, began listing to starboard. Mason ran to the engine room. The door was bent, jammed. He kicked it. It opened. Heat poured out, choking. He stepped inside. Could not see. Just smoke. Just steam. He called out, Roberts, Thompson, anyone. No answer. He moved forward. His foot hit something. He looked down. It was Roberts, most of Roberts. Mason turned away, vomited again. Nothing left. Just bile. Just acid. He wiped his mouth, stepped over what was left of Roberts, kept moving. He found Thompson against the bulkhead, chest crushed, eyes open, staring at nothing. Mason closed the eyes. He looked for Andrews and McCarthy. He found their jackets, their boots, parts he could not identify. He stepped out, sealed the door, walked back to the bridge. His face was black. His hands were shaking. He picked up the intercom. The starboard engine is destroyed. Roberts, Thompson, Andrews, and McCarthy are dead. We are running on one engine. We are making 8 knots. We are still moving toward Malta. 8 knots. Half speed. The convoy was pulling ahead, leaving them behind. Mason watched the other ships disappear over the horizon. The Ohio was alone now, alone in the Mediterranean with 1 engine and a list and 300 miles to go. Mason looked at his crew, at Williams, at his first officer. He said nothing. What was there to say? They all knew. They were dead men. They just had not stopped moving yet. The destroyer came back at 0800 hours. HMS Penn. She was alone. The rest of the convoy was gone. Disappeared over the horizon toward Malta. The Penn's captain was Lieutenant Commander J.H. Swain. He stood on the bridge and looked at the Ohio. The tanker was listing 15 degrees to starboard, dead in the water, smoke pouring from the engine room. One look told Swain everything he needed to know. The Ohio was dying, but she was not dead yet. And as long as she was not dead, there was a chance. Swain picked up his radio. This is Penn to Ohio. Can you make way? Mason grabbed the radio on the Ohio's bridge. This is Ohio. Negative. Starboard engine destroyed. Port engine damaged. We are dead in the water. Swain looked at his first officer. "Can we tow her?" The first officer shook his head. "Sir, she is 14,000 tons. We are 1,000 tons. We do not have the power." Swain looked at the Ohio again, at the 67 men still on deck, at the 11,000 tons of fuel in her tanks. Malta had 17 days of fuel left. Without the Ohio, Malta would run out. Without fuel, Malta would surrender. The mathematics were simple. Swain made his decision. "We are going to try anyway." Mason watched the pen maneuver alongside, watched the destroyer's crew throw lines across. His crew caught them, tied them. The pen's engines roared. The tow lines went tight. The Ohio did not move. The pen's engines roared louder. Smoke poured from the destroyer's stacks. The tow lines stretched, creaked. The Ohio moved. 1 foot, 2 feet, 5 feet. She was moving. 8 knots had become 0 knots. 0 knots had become 2 knots. 2 knots would take 150 hours to reach Malta. 6 days. Mason did the math. The Ohio did not have 6 days. She was taking on water. The list was getting worse. In 6 days she would be on the bottom of the Mediterranean. But 2 knots was better than 0 knots. 2 knots meant they were still trying, still fighting, still alive. Williams watched the pens straining, watched the destroyer's engines smoking. He thought about what it meant. That ship was risking itself to save them. That captain was choosing to stay here in the open water with submarines and bombers instead of running to safety with the rest of the convoy. Williams did not understand that kind of courage, did not understand why anyone would choose to die for strangers. His father had told him men did not do things like that anymore. His father had been wrong about that too. At 09:30 the bombers came back, 12 of them, Italian. They had been searching for the convoy. They found the Ohio instead, alone, crippled, an easy target. The lead bomber rolled into its dive. Mason saw it coming. He grabbed the intercom. All hands brace for impact. Williams was already at his gun. He had not left his gun. He did not think he would ever leave his gun. He would die here, at this gun, firing at aircraft until the bombs found him or the ship sank under him or his heart just stopped from exhaustion. He tracked the bomber, fired. The Bofors hammered. The bomber kept coming, released its bomb at 3,000 feet. The bomb hit the water 30 feet from the Ohio. Close. The explosion lifted the stern. The tow lines snapped. Both of them. The Ohio was adrift again. Swain cursed. His crew scrambled to reconnect the lines. It took 20 minutes. 20 minutes of sitting still while the bombers circled overhead. 20 minutes of waiting to die. The lines were reconnected. The pen started towing again. The Ohio moved. 1 knot now. The list was worse. 18 degrees. 20 degrees. Mason looked at the angle of the deck, at the water creeping up the starboard side. He thought about giving the order to abandon ship, about putting his crew on the pen and letting the Ohio sink. It would be easier. It would be safer. It would mean Malta died. He did not give the order. At 1100 hours, the Ohio's port engine sputtered back to life. The chief engineer had been working on it for 3 hours, had bypassed the damaged systems, had rerouted the fuel lines, had done things that were not in any manual. The engine coughed, smoked, caught. It was not running well. It was not running smoothly, but it was running. The Ohio was making 4 knots now. 4 knots was not fast, but it was faster than 2 knots. Mason picked up the intercom. "Well done, engineering. Keep her running as long as you can." The chief engineer did not reply. He was already back in the engine room trying to keep the impossible machine alive. At 1300 hours, another bomb hit. This one struck the Ohio directly. Forward deck. The explosion tore a hole the size of a car. Water poured in. The bow started sinking. The list got worse. 25 degrees now. The Ohio was rolling onto her side. Mason grabbed the railing to keep from sliding across the bridge. He thought, this is it. This is where she goes down. The crew thought the same thing. Some of them were already putting on life jackets, already preparing to jump. Mason picked up the intercom. "Do not abandon ship. We are not sinking yet." It was a lie. They were sinking. Just slowly. But slowly was better than quickly. Slowly meant they still had time. The pen was joined by another destroyer at 1500 hours. HMS Rye. 2 destroyers now, both of them towing, both of them straining. The Ohio was making 5 knots. The list was 30 degrees. The deck was almost vertical. Men were walking on the bulkheads. The ship was more underwater than above water, but she was still moving, still carrying her cargo, still heading toward Malta. 200 miles to go. Night fell. The temperature dropped. Mason stood on the bridge. He had been standing for 60 hours. His legs were numb. His vision was blurring. He could not remember his wife's name, could not remember his own name. He was just a body operating a ship, a corpse that had not realized it was dead yet. His first officer brought him coffee. Mason drank it. It tasted like oil. Everything tasted like oil. The air smelled like oil. The sea smelled like oil. They were all swimming in oil, living in oil, dying in oil. At 2200 hours, the list reached 35 degrees. The Ohio was lying on her side. The starboard rail was underwater. Waves were washing across the deck. The port engine was flooded. Dead again. The tow lines were the only thing keeping the Ohio moving. The destroyers were making 3 knots. Mason calculated. 200 miles at 3 knots was 66 hours, almost 3 days. The Ohio would not last 3 days. She would not last 3 hours. He looked at the deck, at the water pouring through the holes, at his crew clinging to railings to keep from sliding into the sea. He thought about the order he had not given. Abandon ship. He thought about giving it now, about ending this, about letting the Ohio sink and saving his crew. He opened his mouth. The words did not come. He closed his mouth. They would stay. They would all stay until the end. Williams was still at his gun. He had tied himself to it with rope. The deck was too steep to stand on anymore. He was hanging from the gun mount like a man hanging from a cliff. His arms ached. His shoulders screamed. He did not let go, could not let go. If he let go, he would slide into the water. If he slid into the water, he would drown. He hung there and watched the stars. They were beautiful. He had never noticed how beautiful they were. He thought about his father, about Liverpool, about home. He thought about dying here, about never seeing home again, about his body sinking to the bottom of the Mediterranean and staying there forever. He thought that was all right. Someone had to stay. Someone had to die so others could live. Maybe it was his turn. At midnight, the Ohio stopped moving, completely stopped. The tow lines had broken again. This time, they could not be reconnected. The deck was too steep. The ship was too low in the water. The destroyers circled, looking for a way to attach new lines. There was no way. Swain radioed Mason. "Ohio, this is Penn. We cannot reconnect the tow. Recommend you abandon ship. We will take your crew." Mason did not answer immediately. He looked at his ship, at the Ohio lying on her side, at the water pouring in, at the fuel still trapped in her tanks. 11,000 tons of fuel, Malta's last chance. He picked up the radio. "Penn, this is Ohio. Negative. We are not abandoning. Find another way." Swain looked at his first officer. The first officer said what they were both thinking. "Sir, there is no other way. The Ohio is finished." Swain looked at the tanker, at the men still on deck, at the fuel still in the tanks, at everything that was at stake. He thought about Malta, about the people starving, about the war being lost. He thought about orders and duty and impossible choices. He made his choice. He picked up the radio. "Ohio, this is Penn. We are going to try to push you." Mason did not understand. "Push us." Swain smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a man who knew he was about to do something insane. "Yes, push you. We are going to put our bow against your stern and push. It has never been done before. It will probably not work. But we are going to try." The Penn maneuvered into position, came alongside the Ohio's stern, touched bow to stern. The Penn's engines roared. The Ohio moved, slowly, impossibly. She was moving. 1 knot, 1 single knot. 60 hours to Malta. The Ohio would not last 60 hours. She would not last 6 hours. But she was moving. That was enough. That had to be enough. Mason looked at his crew, at Williams tied to his gun, at his first officer holding the railing, at the men clinging to anything they could find. He thought about what to say, about how to tell them they were going to make it. He could not lie that well. He picked up the intercom. "We are still moving. That is all that matters." The crew did not cheer. They just nodded. They knew the truth. They were not going to make it, but they were still moving, still trying, still refusing to die. That was enough. That had to be enough. The sun came up on August 15th. Malta was 40 miles away. Mason could see it. A dark line on the horizon. Land. Safety. 40 miles. At 1 knot, that was 40 hours. The Ohio would not last 40 hours. She was breaking apart. The deck had split amidships. The bow section and the stern section were connected by fuel pipes and cables and nothing else. The ship was literally held together by the destroyers pushing her. If they stopped pushing, the Ohio would fold in half and sink. Mason watched the cracks spreading across the deck. He thought about bridges, about how bridges collapsed when the supports failed. The Ohio was a bridge with no supports. She was collapsing in slow motion. Williams was still tied to his gun. He had been tied to it for 18 hours. He could not feel his arms anymore, could not feel his legs, could not feel anything except the rope cutting into his chest. He looked at Malta on the horizon. 40 miles. He thought that was funny. They had come 600 miles through submarines and bombers and torpedoes. They had survived 4 days of attacks. And now they were going to sink 40 miles from safety. Williams started laughing. He could not stop. His first officer heard him, asked if he was all right. Williams kept laughing. He did not know why. Maybe because it was funny. Maybe because he was losing his mind. Maybe both. At 0700 the last bomber came. One single aircraft. German. A Junkers 88. It had been searching for the convoy. It found the Ohio instead. The pilot looked down at the crippled tanker, at the destroyers pushing her, at the men on deck. He armed his bombs. This would be easy. The tanker could not turn, could not evade, could not do anything. The pilot rolled into his dive. Williams saw it coming. He untied himself from the gun. His arms screamed, his shoulders popped. He grabbed the gun controls, tracked the bomber, fired. The Bofors had been firing for 4 days. The barrel was warped. The mechanism was damaged. It jammed after 3 shots. Williams hit it, kicked it, screamed at it. The gun did not fire. He looked up at the bomber, at the bomb falling toward him. He thought, this is it. This is how it ends. Not drowning, not burning, crushed by a bomb. He closed his eyes. He thought about his father. He thought, I forgive you. Then he waited. The bomb hit the water 20 feet from the Ohio. The explosion lifted the bow. The cables connecting the bow to the stern snapped. The Ohio broke in half. The bow section started sinking immediately. Water poured into the forward compartments. Men were trapped inside. Mason heard them screaming, heard them pounding on the bulkheads. He could not reach them, could not save them. He stood on the bridge and listened to them die. It took 5 minutes, 5 minutes of screaming, then silence. 12 men drowned in the bow. Mason did not know their names. There had been too many dead, too many names. He had stopped learning names. The stern section was still afloat, barely. The destroyers were still pushing. The stern was making half a knot now. 80 hours to Malta. The stern would not last 80 hours. It would not last 8 hours. The deck was underwater. Waves were washing over the remaining fuel tanks. The crew had abandoned the lower decks. Everyone was on the bridge or clinging to the superstructure. 67 men had started this voyage. 31 were left. 36 were dead. Mason looked at the survivors, at Williams, at his first officer, at the men who had refused to abandon ship. He thought about telling them to jump, to swim to the destroyers, to save themselves. He did not tell them. They would not listen. They had come this far. They would stay until the end. At 0900, a Maltese patrol boat found them. The boat's captain radioed ahead. The Ohio is coming. She is in pieces, but she is coming. On Malta, people stopped what they were doing. They walked to the harbor. Thousands of them. Tens of thousands. They lined the walls. They stood on the ramparts. They waited. At 1000 hours, they saw the destroyers. At 10:30, they saw what the destroyers were pushing. A piece of a ship, not even a whole ship, just the stern section, listing 40 degrees, barely above water, more wreck than vessel, but still moving, still coming. The crowd was silent. Nobody cheered, nobody spoke. They just watched. Mason stood on the bridge. He could see the harbor, could see the people, could see the stone walls of Valletta. 1 mile to go. The stern was sinking lower. The fuel tanks were rupturing. Oil was leaking into the water, a black slick spreading behind them. The port engine was flooded. The steering was gone. The rudder was jammed. The Ohio was not a ship anymore. She was debris, floating debris being pushed by 2 destroyers. But she was still moving, still carrying her cargo, still refusing to die. At 1100 hours, the Ohio entered Valletta Harbor. The destroyers pushed her to the fueling pier. Men on the pier threw lines, secured the wreck, connected fuel pumps, started pumping immediately. They pumped for 12 hours. They pumped out 10,000 tons of kerosene and diesel, enough fuel to keep Malta operational until November, enough fuel to launch fighters, enough fuel to run submarines, enough fuel to win. While they pumped, the Ohio settled lower. The fuel was the only thing keeping her afloat. As the fuel was pumped out, water replaced it. The stern sank lower, lower. The deck went underwater. The superstructure tilted. At 2300 hours, the pumping stopped. The tanks were empty. The Ohio had given everything. There was nothing left. The stern section slipped beneath the surface. It settled on the bottom of the harbor. 12 feet of water. The bridge was still above water. Just barely. The Ohio had made it to Malta. She had delivered her cargo. And then she had died. Mason stood on the bridge as the water rose around him. His crew had already evacuated. They were on the pier. Safe. He was alone. The last man on the Ohio. He looked at his ship. At what was left of his ship. At the wreck sitting on the bottom of the harbor. He thought about the men who had died getting her here. Jones, Miller, Clark, Roberts, Thompson, Andrews, McCarthy, the 12 men in the bow, the 131 men on the Eagle, the men on the Bramham, the men on the Clan Ferguson, the men on the Empire Hope, Cork, Bernardi, all of them dead so this ship could reach Malta, so this fuel could be delivered, so this island could survive. Mason thought about whether it was worth it. He did not know. He would never know. He climbed down from the bridge, stepped onto the pier. His legs gave out. He collapsed. Men caught him, carried him to an ambulance. He did not remember the ambulance, did not remember the hospital, did not remember the next 3 days. He slept for 72 hours. When he woke up, a doctor told him he had been awake for 96 hours straight. His body had simply shut down. The doctor asked him how he felt. Mason did not know how to answer. He felt empty. He felt hollow. He felt like he had died with his ship, and nobody had told his body yet. On August 18th, Mason was told he was being awarded the George Cross, Britain's highest civilian decoration, for gallantry, for courage, for refusing to abandon his ship. Mason listened to the citation. It said he had saved Malta. It said he was a hero. Mason did not feel like a hero. Heroes were supposed to feel something. Mason felt nothing. He accepted the medal. He said thank you. He meant nothing by it. The words were just sounds. Williams was in the same hospital, in the bed next to Mason. He had frostbite in his fingers, nerve damage in his arms, permanent hearing loss. The doctors said he would recover. Williams did not care about recovering. He cared about sleeping, about not dreaming, about not seeing the men burning in the water every time he closed his eyes. The doctors gave him pills. The pills did not help. Williams stopped sleeping. He would lie awake at night and stare at the ceiling and think about his father, about Liverpool, about the lie that brought him here. He did not hate his father anymore. He understood now. His father had been trying to protect him. It had not worked. Nothing could have protected him from this. But his father had tried. That was enough. Mason was released from the hospital on August 25th. He was given orders to return to England, to report to the Admiralty, to receive his medal properly. He did not want to go. He wanted to stay in Malta, wanted to see what his sacrifice had accomplished. But orders were orders. He boarded a transport ship, sailed to Gibraltar, flew to London, arrived on September 2nd. Elsie was waiting for him at the airfield. He had not seen her in 3 years. He did not know she would be there. He did not know what to say to her. She ran to him, hugged him, started crying. Mason stood there. He did not hug back. He could not. He had forgotten how. Elsie pulled away, looked at him. Her face changed. She saw something in his eyes, something broken, something missing. She asked him what happened. Mason shook his head. He could not explain, could not put it into words. How do you explain watching men drown? How do you explain hearing them scream? How do you explain being too tired to care? He said, "I am sorry." Elsie asked what he was sorry for. Mason said everything. "I am sorry for everything." They went home, to the house they had never lived in. Mason walked through the rooms. They felt strange, foreign, like someone else's life. Elsie made tea. They sat at the kitchen table. Mason looked at her. She looked older, tired, sad. He wondered if he looked the same to her. Probably worse. She asked him about the Ohio, about Malta, about the medal. Mason told her the truth. He told her about the bombs, about the torpedoes, about the men who died, about the ship breaking in half, about reaching Malta and having nothing left. Elsie listened. She did not interrupt. When he finished, she took his hand. She said, "You did what you had to do. You saved thousands of people. You should be proud." Mason looked at their joined hands. He said, "I do not feel proud. I do not feel anything." Elsie squeezed his hand. She said, "You will. It takes time, but you will feel again." Mason wanted to believe her. He tried to believe her. He could not. Something inside him had broken. Something the Ohio had taken with her to the bottom of Valletta Harbor. He did not think it was coming back. On September 9th, Mason received his George Cross from King George VI. The ceremony was at Buckingham Palace. There were photographers, newspapers, crowds. Mason stood in his uniform and accepted the medal and saluted and said the right things. Inside, he was empty. The king shook his hand, told him he was a credit to Britain. Mason thanked him. Meant nothing. Afterward, he went home. He put the medal in a drawer. He never looked at it again. Malta survived. The fuel from the Ohio lasted until November. By November, another convoy got through. By December, Malta was resupplied. By January, Malta was launching attacks again. By February, Rommel was losing North Africa. By May, Rommel had surrendered. The war turned. Britain won. All because one crippled tanker refused to sink. All because 67 men refused to abandon ship. All because some things are worth dying for, even when you do not want to die. Mason died in 1978. He was 76 years old. He never went back to sea. He lived in the house in London with Elsie. They stayed married. They never had children. Mason never talked about the Ohio, never talked about Malta, never talked about the war. Elsie never asked. She knew some things could not be talked about. Some things could only be survived. On the day he died, Mason was sitting in his chair reading the newspaper. He closed the paper, looked at Elsie, said, "I am tired." Then he closed his eyes. Elsie thought he was sleeping. He was not sleeping. He was gone. The doctor said it was his heart. Elsie thought it was something else. She thought his heart had broken in 1942. It had just taken 36 years to stop beating. Williams lived until 2003. He was 80 years old. He never left Liverpool. He worked at the docks, loaded ships, unloaded ships, spent his whole life around ships but never boarded one. He married, had 4 children, 8 grandchildren. He never told them about the Ohio, never told them about Malta, never told them about the 4 days he spent tied to a gun waiting to die. His wife found his medals after he died. She had never known he had medals. She asked his children if they knew. They did not know. Williams had kept it secret his whole life. At his funeral, someone read his citation. His grandchildren cried. They had never known their grandfather was a hero. Williams would have said he was not a hero. He was just a boy who did what he was told and got lucky enough to survive. That was all. That was enough. The wreck of the Ohio remained in Valletta Harbor until 1946. She was too damaged to repair, too damaged to salvage. They cut her apart piece by piece and sold the metal for scrap. By 1947, she was gone. Nothing left. Just memories. Just stories. Just the knowledge that once there was a ship that refused to die. Once there were men who refused to give up. Once there was a voyage that changed the war. That was enough. That had to be enough.